That's a nice day with us. Nigeria, a leading African economy, faces a critical revenue gap threatening its development goals with an annual $10 billion shortfall to meet the Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs. The top 1% of Nigerians hold a disproportionate share of wealth, owning 25.5%, compared to the bottom 50%'s 4.7%, highlighting the country's deep inequality. Government efforts to boost revenue, like the Strategic Revenue Growth Initiative, have faced criticism for regressive measures that burden lower-income citizens. This Fair Tax Monitor report emphasizes the need to target high-net-worth individuals through progressive taxes, property tax reforms, and stricter compliance to reduce inequality, increase revenues, and support sustainable development, unlocking opportunities for broader economic growth across the nation. Joining me for more on this, I have Ishmael Zulu, Policy Officer, Tax and Equity, Tax Justice Network Africa. Thank you, Ishmael, for joining me today.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Absolutely. I'm tempted to ask you if we sort of need, a tax town hall so we can understand all of this, because we're talking about so many taxes in the past, how many weeks now? Well, that's okay. There is no denying that Nigeria sort of stands at a critical juncture as its revenue gap threatens, its sustainability and some other things in that regard, talking about developmental ambitions. So I'd like you to talk to us about, how much of an issue this really is.
Yeah, perfect. I think just to set the scene and paint a picture of how serious the problem is. So Nigeria is has one of the largest economies in Africa in terms of its GDP, with over $200 billion in GDP. But then when you take that and you look at it from a tax perspective, the Nigerian Revenue Authority is only able to raise 9.4% in terms of its tax to GDP ratio. I know that terminology may be a bit technical, but essentially Nigeria has one of the lowest tax to GDP ratios in the world, in Africa and in the world. What this means is that the amount of tax the Nigerian government is collecting versus the size of the GDP, it's significantly lower. The average in most African countries is around 16%, and in the rest of the world is between 15 to 20%. So Nigeria's percentage of 9.4 is significantly lower. And what this means is that the government has very limited spending power. This is spending power that they can allocate money towards social spending on education, on health. And then it also brings about challenges when it comes to addressing poverty and inequality. In order to beat poverty and inequality, you need resources to do that. But the Revenue Authority is not able to raise the adequate amount of revenue. And then the last point I'll point towards is it increases the reliance on borrowing. So the Nigerian government has resorted to borrowing because we're not able to raise adequately through the tax system. And what that means is that our debt burden has increased significantly in Nigeria on account of the increased borrowing. This is significantly concerning today because the cost of borrowing today for African countries is much higher than it was 10, 15, 20 years ago. There is a premium that is attached to African countries because we are classified by organizations like the IMF as being high-risk countries. So because of this label of high-risk countries, our credit has attached a premium, and the percentage that we pay on our interest is much higher. A few years, in around 2021, the Nigerian government spent 92% of what was raised in tax revenue on servicing debt. Now that means there's only 8% left for everything else that the government requires. So you see how having a low tax to GDP ratio has significant implications on the prospects for development, but then also just prospects on spending on education and health and these significant sectors that help keep the economy going.
Well, many Nigerians will ask, they would say, well, the ones you've been collecting, what have you been doing with it? Away from that. Now, your report highlighted some challenges with the nation's tax system. I'd like you to sort of dwell a bit on these challenges and how they sort of inhibit tax revenue generation.
Yeah, sure, definitely. So I think for our tax report, we focused on the weaknesses in the tax system vis-a-vis targeting high net worth individuals, those that are rich, those that are seemed to be super rich. And when it came to that, there are specific taxes. So taxes like capital gains tax, which is a tax levied on the transfer of property from one person to another or from one individual to a company. So that transfer of property, there's a capital tax gains that is levied. And within the Nigerian tax system, there are loopholes that exist that allow for individuals to shift money and avoid paying that capital gains tax. One example I can highlight is that there is no capital gains tax that is levied on gifts. So if someone gifts a piece of land to you, there are ways in which you can avoid paying that capital gains tax. And as a result, you would find that the contribution of capital gains tax to the total revenue pot has been significantly lower. And then another big one we highlighted in our report was Nigeria's property taxation regime. So the property taxation regime can, I think there's a lot of reform that needs to be done to bring it up to speed with the requirements for today's general business environment. So in terms of property taxes, at present, there is no single property register in Nigeria. I think it's split across some of the different states. So each state has its own way of taxing property, and there are discrepancies. And within these discrepancies lie the loopholes that allow for wealthy individuals to not pay their fair share on property taxes. And but the overarching one that we have noted in our report on Nigeria's tax system is compliance issues. So, of course, here and there are issues that need to be improved in our tax system, but then at present, as things stand, a big problem is compliance. A lot of people within the tax system are not compliant, which leads to the low revenue collection that the Federal Inland Revenue Service has seen over the last few years. And it also speaks to the broken social contract that exists. Like you were highlighting earlier on, a lot of citizens feel, even if we pay our fair share of taxes, how do you then use that money? There's issues of corruption now that come in. So because I don't feel my money is being spent right, I should not pay my fair share in taxes. And then the government is saying we're not able to provide these services to the Nigerian population because you're not paying your fair share in taxes. So there's that tension that exists now between the citizens and the government. So it's created now this system where we're seeing, as a result, that there is low tax compliance, and the government is struggling to keep that social contract of providing goods and services, and then the citizens don't feel they should pay taxes because they don't feel the government is using the money in the right way.
Well, now you recommended a progressive wealth tax. I mean, why so? I mean, we might as well also begin by defining who falls within the HNWI and how they may be taxed and what percentage are we even looking at and who qualifies. I want us to sort of understand, what you've put together in that recommendation.
Yeah, no problem. So I think the first reason why we're pushing for a progressive wealth taxation is resources. Revenue. So the potential revenue that exists in implementing a wealth tax in Nigeria is around $6 billion US. Now, this is more than enough to increase the allocation on education, on health spending, and then this would also go a long way in addressing existing inequalities. There is a huge gap that exists between the wealthy in Nigeria and then the poor. So you have extremely wealthy individuals and then you have extremely poor individuals, and there is this gap that exists. So one of the ways we're recommending to bridge that gap is by implementing a wealth tax that targets these super wealthy individuals, and then those resources are then trickled down to those that are at the bottom. And then this would also address the loopholes in the tax system. So Nigeria, like many African countries, and not just in Africa, this exists globally, we have noted that wealthy individuals have ways of avoiding to pay their taxes. So what happens is that their wealth is not just, it doesn't come in like in our day-to-day monthly income. At the end of the month, you receive a salary, you pay taxes on that salary, and that's it. Wealthy individuals may hold assets in Dubai, in tax havens like Mauritius, in Singapore, and it's difficult for the revenue agencies to keep track of some of that revenue. So that is a wealth tax would go a long way in addressing some of these loopholes in our tax system. And then in terms of what we're proposing, it's a tiered, we don't want to just take a blanket approach. So we're looking at for wealth between $1 million and $5 million, a 1% tax. And then from 5 to 50 million US dollars at 2%. And then for wealth over $50 million, we're looking at a 5%. And then lastly, just to clarify, when I'm talking about a wealth tax, when we're looking at high net worth individuals, we're looking at their net wealth. So this is the value of an individual's assets minus their liabilities. So the amount of wealth someone actually owns after taking into consideration all of their debts.
Right now, your recommendation seems different from the one made by the chairman of the Presidential Fiscal Policy and Tax Reforms Committee. Now, your report says Nigeria would raise more than $6 billion with rates at 2% on wealth over $5 billion, 5% on wealth over $50 million, and 10% on wealth over $1 billion. Now, compare that to Taiwo-led committee's proposed 25% personal income tax on those earning 100 million naira and above monthly. I mean, what's essentially different between the two, and what do you make of Taiwo's, Taiwo's committee's recommendation?
Yes, so I think to start off, I agree with the Taiwo-led committee's proposition. When it comes to issues of increasing taxes or introducing taxes, automatically people get defensive. Now, just to shed a bit more light, with Taiwo's proposition, what he is bringing to the table is that there are different levels of income earners within Nigeria. So those that are on the top end, those that have that are earning over 100 million naira, those are the specific target where the proposed tax rate is around 25%. So with a progressive tax system where those that are earning below are paying a less rate and those that are earning above are paying a higher rate, it's a progressive proposition. Now, the difference lies in that with Taiwo's proposition, it is a tax that is going to be levied on an individual's monthly income, whereas what we are proposing, let's say in addition to this, is taking stock of an individual's total wealth over a period of 1 year. If this person over a period of 1 year has this much wealth.
Ishmael, let me come in here. Do you think both can run concurrently, or we need to, find a way to ensure it's just one? Because it would look like we're doing too much already.
Yeah, so it's both. I know it sounds like a lot, but when we're looking at our tax system, so just to clarify, in our report, we highlight how over 99% of wealthy individuals do not pay their fair share in taxes. And what we're trying to do is capture those wealthy individuals. We are not proposing taxes that will target the middle class and those that are below, but we are trying to capture those that are the wealthy individuals that are not paying their fair share in taxes. So as it exists, there are a lot of wealthy individuals that are not contributing as they should to taxes. So some of these propositions are trying to bridge that gap. So the response to your question is yes, the two can run concurrently, specifically if it is implemented well in such a way that we're targeting these wealthy individuals that are not paying their fair share in taxes. So a 25% effective tax rate on that is being led by Taiwan would be progressive, because it is actually Nigeria's tax rate is considerably lower than most countries in the ECOWAS region in West Africa. So the two can run concurrently, and then the one we are proposing now will take stock of an individual's entire wealth and then levy a small percentage on that annually. So that's the difference between the two. So one is on the monthly income that is raised, and then the other one is an annual tax that is raised based off of an individual's stock of wealth over a period of 1 year.
You know what, Ishmael? In the next 2 minutes, we may need to go on a short break. But before then, I'd like you to answer this in about 30 seconds. Now, with a tax compliance rate of just, 0.035% among the wealthiest Nigerians, you will agree with me that, the government must employ certain strategies to sort of improve compliance, because you also talked about, the dearth of compliance. What are your recommendations? If we can have that in about 30 seconds or less, so we can go for this break and then come back.
No problem. So I think, as quickly as I think it's important to bring about transparency legislation where we can actually take stock of how much wealth individuals have. And then we would need to strengthen the federal inland services, so their capacity to actually capture wealth and then levy taxes on it, on that wealth, is going to go a long way in improving that compliance. I can stop there and then we can carry on the conversation.
All right, thank you so much. That's so thoughtful and kind of you. We'll take a break now. When we come back, we still have Ishmael Zulu right here with me. Stay with us. You're watching Business Edge. Welcome back. Well, I still have Ishmael Zulu right here with me. Thank you, Ishmael, for staying with me.
Thank you. Interesting conversation.
You can say that again. So before we went on that timeout, we're talking about, some of these challenges and your recommendations, so that we can overcome them. You can take it up from there.
Yes. So I think one of the things I mentioned is enhancing our transparency laws. So when I look at transparency laws, we're looking at beneficial ownership, so that behind some of the corporate enterprises, we have laws that allow for us to know who are the faces behind some of these corporate entities, so that we know their beneficial owners. That will help in identifying who the high net worth individuals are within Nigeria. I've heard rumors, and this is not in the report, this is just off the record, that there could even be wealthy people that have more money than Dangote, for instance, but on record, he's the one who has the most money. So I think it goes a long way. It's important to ensure that we are strengthening our transparency laws. That will go a long way in identifying high net worth individuals, and then increasing the capacity of the federal inland service revenue. So in order, certain revenue authorities, one of the examples I can give you is in Uganda. What Uganda had done was that they set up a unit within the revenue authority that was specifically tasked with the taxes of high net worth individuals. And within the first year of implementation, they raised an additional $35 million through that task force that was created. So this is something that Nigeria could bring on board to ensure that we are growing the capacity of the Federal Inland Revenue Service to actually better target wealthy individuals and then levy the taxes that are needed on them.
All right, thank you so much. And just before you go, let me just get your thoughts on this. I mean, while this is aimed at wealth redistribution and what have you, don't you think it might be a bit unfair on the high net worth individuals if you're having all of these taxes, levied on them? In about 30 seconds.
Yeah, so I think my response is no. So I don't think it is unfair because of, let me summarize it in two reasons since I only have 30 seconds. So one, the compliance as it stands of wealthy individuals paying their taxes is significantly low. As you said, it's just about 0.035%. So at present, they're not paying their fair share in taxes. That needs to be improved. And then secondly, what we're trying to do is rebalance the economy. The amount of wealth that is held by the rich is significantly high as opposed to those that are at the bottom. So what we're trying to do is share some of that wealth to the bottom through our tax system by levying a tax that is specifically targeted at the wealthy, and then use those resources now to then bring about and fight inequality and poverty.
All right, Ishmael Zulu, Policy Officer, Tax and Equity, Tax Justice Network Africa. Thank you for your time and your thoughts on Business Edge today.
Thank you very much for having me.